phased manner. So I have a great panel and I've had a chat with them and it was wonderful to understand. And incidentally, all three of them come from business verticals like oil and gas, they come from renewable energy, they come from pharmaceuticals, which are, I would say very entrenched industries of India. And to bring change and bring digitization and a new culture within such organizations is a much taller task today than setting up a startup. So would love to hear from them more as to how they're doing it. So Namita, you've been, as the leader of MCure Pharmaceuticals, you've now been 12 years been there in the business. You've studied in the US, you worked in the US, and obviously, when you come from US to India, you do realize that, you feel some challenges. You feel as if, somebody is, not even taking your ideas very openly. And at that time, you're so young and so vibrant, so energetic that you want to bring change virtually to everything. So how did you balance it out? So 12 years in the business, and when your business was growing so rapidly, I understandably it grew from a 400 CR company to a 4,000 CR company, which is a large sort of a growth within 10 years. And given that there was a certain way of working which you thought could be better with your education, with your exposure, how did you balance it out yourself?
So it's a great privilege to be having and leading a family business. It gives you the ability to have a large impact, but it comes with its share of challenges, like we discussed. For me, when I joined 12 years back, one of the biggest things that helped me is I had 2 solid degrees. So I'm a chartered accountant. I'd done my MBA in one of the best schools, Duke University. I'd worked in a company that was not my father's for 6 years before I joined the business. So I think for a family Gen Next, having some of those degrees and that experience, however cliched it may sound, it makes a big difference because you get a lot more credibility when you join. However, having said that, I was joking with Ritu that there were a lot of people who had helped my father build the company, and they were over dinner, and I used to refer to them as uncles and all the old timers. And then when you come in and you disagree with them and you so see that they're not open to digitization, not open to a process-driven culture, which eventually is needed when you want to scale as a company. That's when the real challenges start. And that's where there's a little bit amount of balancing. So we spoke about collaboration. And with some people, they're open to change. When you show the evidence, I'm a fact-based person, I'm a numbers person. When you show them the numbers, they buy in. But there are a lot of people who, in spite of the evidence, in spite of showing the facts, are just stubborn because they're set in their old ways. And some of those, it's a tough thing, but you have to replace them with younger people with fresh perspectives. So I've had a journey where there was some amount of credibility, but there was a lot of challenges with the old-timers. And like I said, some adapted, a little bit I adapted, and a few of them we replaced. So it's tough when you're trying to digitize and bring in new systems and trying to convince people of the merit that this is needed to scale.
And I mean, as a business, when you get into diversification mode, so obviously when you do the company literally from X to Z, what kind of diversification was it that you saw? And I mean, I would love to hear a little more about the processes that you brought. I mean, from a people-dominant culture to a process-dominant culture. I mean, if you can give us some use cases that you saw in your company that, between you and your father, established in your company to get it growing faster.
Sure. So 2 quick examples here, like you rightly pointed. When I joined, it was a 400 crore company. We're about 4,500 crores now. So it's grown very rapidly. And when I joined, the entire sales came from India. And at this point, only 40% of the sales comes from India. 60% is from global markets. That itself is a diversification. It's a huge diversification in terms of geographical risk and making sure you're spread across the globe. What we did is we brought in the culture of acquisitions. So if you want to establish your presence in the European or US market, you can't always grow organically. And you need to invest in the right companies, acquire the right companies, and have multiple CEOs. So you have to be able to delegate, let go, bring an entrepreneurial culture where there'll be a group CEO, but you'll have multiple CEOs who will have a skin in the game, equity, will be empowered, and will drive the business post-acquisition. So I think we did that very well because my father, by his very nature, is able to be a mentor and is able to delegate, which I think a lot of family businesses lack. And I think it's his ability to do that that helped us scale geographically. And I think that was a very, very important role in diversification. The second thing, like I told you, is as you scale, and now further, if you want to go from a 4,500 crore to a 10,000 crore company, the role of the service function has to become very important. So whether it's finance / internal audit or IT or HR, you have to have some very strong professionals in these roles so that they put in the right systems and the right culture to help you scale, but scale in the right manner.
Correct. I think that's fair, and I'm going to come back to you a little more on the service functions in an organization. So I'll come to you, Nidhi. Suzlon has been a pioneer in renewable energy in India, but then in the last decade, we've also seen a lot of number of players coming in renewable energy space, you know, small scale players, large scale players, China. So they're all sort of been hitting the market. And you know, when you're sort of one of the pioneers, you also have realized as an organization become a school. You know, so kids graduate and go to other companies, which is not what you want. I mean, as a promoters, that's not what you want. You don't want to be a school, you want to be a corporate, you want to be an organization. But across board, I have seen whether they were education companies, retail companies, it's happened like that. Now, you know, so when all of this is there and, you know, your own company has to go through a lot of changes to keep up with the market and the market needs and the competition and be competitive, how was it that was achieved? I mean, you know, in your own journey, how have you seen the entire change happen for Suzlon to be, you know, not be a school and be a more sort of absolutely right there organization going with the current times?
So Ritu, I think I started out in 2009, right around the chapter when renewable energy shifted out from just being an advocacy of what is it to be just renewable energy. You know, it was earlier during my father's generation, if I see, there was a lot of focus that went on saying, what's a chapter of renewable energy? What does it entail? How do you really make money out of this? You know, a lot of education parameters, like you said, an institution or a school. From there on to the time that when I came on board, a lot of challenges surfaced, right? And I always have this anecdote of saying energy industry often changes by 3 years. So, you know, every 3 years, there's something new that happens. Either the market has become extremely competitive, which is the case now, or you see the policy and the regulatory shifts, which have happened, which has also happened now. So in those 7 to 9 years, which I've been with the company, we've seen that every 2 years, there's been a dramatic shift of market, sector, people, competitiveness. Banking sector at the same time on raising finances and capital has gone through a number of changes. So when you're trying to set up a business for the next level of growth, and you're also dealing with these very dynamic changes, some which are really not in your control. You know, if you talk about introductions of policies, now we're seeing a shift happen in Make in India. But back in the days when I look back onto the time when my father started 23 years ago, there was no concept of Make in India. And turbine has literally thousands of components which are bought outside of India. So there was a huge preaching that went down and still goes in to see that how can, you know, rather than a shift from now renewable energy focused to just Suzlon as a company, the shift has gone dramatic as a sector itself to be saying, Make in India, how do we have Suzlon play that part as a pioneer and drive that focus to be saying, yesterday we saw a safeguard duty come in on solar panels, which are coming in, and which is long-standing. So we're seeing that shifts happen. But now, as a company, what we have adapted on to see is more diversification, for sure. So we've taken concepts just not purely as wind energy or solar energy. What we've realized is if we have to compete to the traditional oil and gas and coal, we need both energies to combine. So we've brought in innovation to be saying, you know, cyclically, when you see it during the day, when wind is high, the solar energy is low. So we're combining the two sources of energy by putting wind-solar hybrid together. We're not just relying on turbines which are onshore on land, because India being a land-constrained country, we're moving them offshore to go into the ocean focus more and more. So we're seeing a lot of these chapters of innovation at the same time because it's so competitive, like you mentioned. We're seeing, you know, if you mention solar, you mentioned China, and you mentioned how many companies are there in this market trying to make the solar story. it's literally every nook and cranny you'll find a solar player, right? So how do you differentiate in such a complex yet dynamic market and keep an eye on the cost because you still have to be competitive? So we built in a whole chapter on digitization that works on cost improvements, right from the site technicians using the apps without having the internet, to climbing and building amongst the tallest towers and the biggest rotor turbines. We have digitization that enables technicians to climb, tells them exactly what to do, report back in. And sitting out of Pune, we're monitoring every single turbine in the world. And this was a big task when I came in. So we worked through geographies. We have R&D centers in Netherlands, Germany, across the world. Then we have turbines literally wherever the wind takes us across 18 countries. Sure. So bringing in the aspect of digitization helped to bring that control centrally. At the same time, the innovation chapter came in to be saying, well, we're fertiling these new business opportunities and we're maintaining the turbines. So it's like you would have an iPhone first generation to the iPhone 10 with you, and you're doing maintenance and operation of all of them. So how do we build in that into our supply chain? We again put in a digital chapter, not just of the plain ERP systems, but building on the Six Sigma and saying how can we track every single equipment part from the vendor coming to us manufacturing, putting it in place, putting on the logistics, getting onto site, erecting, and then maintaining it for 23 years to be saying it's still efficiently performing like your first iPhone 10 to now, the iPhone 2, all of them.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I guess that's a tall task today, you know, to be in a space which probably you're right, there is small startups to MSMEs to small and medium businesses and then to corporates, all sort of trying to take the share of the same pie. So I'm going to come to digitization in a while once I speak to Rama. So Rama, you're in, you know, at Kirloskar, you're doing the oil and gas sector, which to me is, you know, honestly, I just don't understand it. I mean, it's such a complex sector as far as I see it. And then you've taken not just kept it to Indian shores, you've also taken the whole group global. So what was it that, you know, was expected out of you as the new gen member joining the family? And I mean, did you at any point of time also feel that, you know, while I'm trying to achieve all of this, you know, there were some passions that I had that I wanted to bring to the business. They had to be compromised or they had to be sort of changed. And in hindsight, you sometimes think that idea was quite more workable than this is, and though we still have to follow it.
Right, so, you know, I'll tell you a bit of my background. I'm actually a mathematics and biology major.
No wonder.
And, and then I went into bioengineering where we published this paper on a potential dengue vaccine. And it got commercialized, but it's in clinical trials today. So I told my father, you know, I don't want to wait for the next 10 years for clinical trials to take place and the product to come out and just waste my time for the next few years. So why don't I come back and join the family business? And that's when I started working in the parent company, Kirloskar Brothers, which is a 130-year-old company. So Kirloskar Brothers essentially specializes in water chemicals, wastewater segment. They do all kinds of pumps right from your completely standardized business to your customized solutions as well. And it gave me a lot of exposure. My father made me go through a whole year-long induction program where, you know, starting right from the foundry, I was made to study different aspects of the factories. Because, you know, my father says that you need to understand what you're doing. You need to know what's in the box to be able to think outside the box.
Right.
So that was a very good induction program for me to understand, you know, how these pumps are made right from the casting stage to the end product. And I started then to essentially dwell deeper into each department across the company to understand the business in its entirety. After that, I was put in the product portfolio management department where I was able to look at all the products in the group. And that also gave me a very good introduction into the businesses, the markets, the customer value propositions. And eventually, from that role, I was put into Kirloskar Ebara, which is the oil and gas sector. One aspect which, you know, my father had a vision was how do we make the Kirloskar brand global? And to be global, you need to be globally competitive in all aspects. One is global presence, and second is how do you ensure your products surpass that of your competitors? Because being an Indian company, you have to work that, you have to go that extra distance. You have to be better to be considered at par with a foreign company. Unfortunately, that is the way things are. So essentially what we did was we started with these acquisitions abroad to grow inorganically. We have this company in the UK called SPP, which my brother runs. It's the largest manufacturer of pumps in the UK. After that, we have another company that essentially specializes in sewage, oil and gas, although it's upstream oil and gas, which means upstream rigs, as well as sewage water pumps in the Netherlands. In South Africa, we have a pump company that does uranium and gold slurry pumps, which go into uranium and gold mines. After that, we also have a sales office in Thailand. And I think this has given us that ability to also quote in many of these markets, because all of these markets have certain barriers to entry, one being localization norms. So for example, if I want to quote for a tender in the UK, I need about 30% value addition in the UK. Otherwise, I'm not eligible to participate in those tenders. A very big market for the oil and gas sector is Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Aramco, which is their government-owned company, set up this new ICTIVA program, which is in-kingdom total value addition, where 80% of value addition has to be done locally. It's very much like our Make in India program. It's meant to promote the local economy and provide jobs for the locals. That's one aspect in terms of globalizing, and also creating customer value propositions. Every company is known for that product in its field. So if you talk about Kirloskar Ebara, you know that it goes into oil and gas refineries. You talk about SPP, you know that it goes into oil and gas offshore rigs. You talk about Rodelta, it goes into sewage wastewater pumps as well as in oil and gas refinery. Or Breba, which goes into mining pumps.
Right.
So we are trying to create that brand recall for different brands that we've developed. And of course, there's Kirloskar Brothers, which is our water and chemicals company. Secondly, coming back to becoming more robust in our R&D process, because we need to have superior products. That's a requirement. The first thing we did is taken a big digitization program. As you know, we do heavy engineering, so there's a lot of foundry activities required. One area that we have focused in is we have the world's largest 3D printer. So it essentially makes sand molds. It cuts down the lead time from about 7 months to 72 hours. And that is a huge advantage for a company like us, because the kind of deliveries today that we are able to give our customers, there's nobody else in the world that can match that. Sure. Also, I think 3D printing's being additive manufacturing and not subtractive. There's a lot less waste. There's a lot less pollution. So there are many different advantages other than just lead time. There are other aspects that we have digitized in our companies, such as earlier, we used to, if you were a customer, you would call us and you would tell us, this is the kind of pump I need. I need it with so much pressure, so much flow, and we would have an engineer who would then do some tedious mathematical calculations to select a pump. But now we have something called a variant configurator, which is very simplistically put a pump selection software. Right, so you can give me your parameters, I put them in that software, and it'll give me a output pump. And I think this is helping in changing it to a process-oriented organization and not a people-oriented organization, because earlier, if you had a more experienced engineer, he would possibly give you a better selection versus a younger engineer. Sure. So those are the ways in which we are trying to improve different aspects of our company.
That's pretty interesting and very intense also, I must agree, when it comes to doing a business. And I wonder what a young person like you is actually going to do over there, but it's so much, it sounds like fun. It is fun. So, I think today one of the biggest needs, both for large organizations, small organizations, entrepreneurial organizations, is to look at digitization. And as you said, 3D was something that you experimented with, and you probably have the biggest 3D printer ever. And so how is it that you approach digitization? I mean, what is the purpose that you look for when you went on to digitize your companies? What was it in the bottom line that you were trying to achieve by digitizing your companies? And I do understand that digitization is a function of business and not, and technology is only an enabler in this, right? So what was it that you're looking to achieve digitization, and what have been the problems that you all faced when you were digitizing, and what functions did it ease for you? What were the functions that it challenged you further? So largely, I mean, your sort of journey to digitization would be very interesting to hear.
So I think in terms of digitization, and coming to one of the other topics, change too fast, I think that no change is too fast if your organization is able to absorb it at every level. In terms of why we started digitization, I don't believe we have a choice, because all our competitors today in the niche sectors that we operate are essentially Germans or Americans. And I believe that this digital wave started in the developed countries because of their deficit of manpower. And to make up for that deficit, they had to go with automation. But in the long run, it is going to be an advantage, because the kind of productivity, the kind of quality, the consistency in quality that automation gives you, you will not be able to replicate that using a human workforce. Now, you could say, that would be great for the customer and the company, right? Because it allows us to streamline our operations, allows us to reduce cost, enhance productivity. So that'll be great for the company and the consumer, but it may not be such a great thing for our country, where we have excess manpower. So in terms of, I look at it in terms of Industry 4.0 as being a set of tools that will help you enhance efficiency in just about any process. And I feel that in India, we need to focus more on what India can offer to the world, and where else can we deploy these Industry 4.0 tools. Can we deploy them in textiles to help our textile industry scale up, or our handicraft industry to scale up? So, and that automatically would create the jobs we require. Because today, if a foreign company sets up a manufacturing facility in India, it's not going to provide the same amount of jobs that it would have, say, 20 or 30 years ago. And the same would be for the Indian companies, because we would have to keep up, if not surpass, the rest in order to compete on a global landscape.
Interesting. So Nidhi, what was it that you were trying to achieve with digitizing Suzlon, and have you been able to get there, and were there some things new that you came across while the process was on?
So I think Ritu kind of surpasses and almost limits to where, Brahma also touched on, saying digitization at a 4.2 digital revolution that we're seeing is, in a lot of retro aspects, not a choice anymore. It's almost a setting norm in the pace of way we're working. So if I touch upon my industry on renewable energy, when we started out, luckily on the technological curve, everything starts with technology. Right from the design of the turbine creation, which we do between 3 geographies, everything gets onto CAD design. CAD was still at an older part with the 3D printing coming in now. It saves time to bring product to market. So for us, one of the biggest aspects of improvement that we wanted to do with digital adaptation was to see how we can make our entire new product development go digital, which was cutting across 5 geographies, multicultural people, moving away from people centricity and engineering centricity to now process centricity, focusing more on turbines which were limitless. So we introduced a turbine which has been a combination of a lattice structure. So if you see the bottom part, it's that typical crisscross that you see, and the top part, which is tubular. So when I go to my international geographies, they only do the full tubular tower, because they feel there's human aspects of health and safety that you need to think about. You can't leave a tower open for a technician to climb over. When you think about India, we're running out of sites and spaces which can just be done with tubular tower, and the cost is something that the market's not going to pay. So we had to revolutionize, and this is where our technology of new product development came in, and we combined the two. So we put the bottom part as a lattice structure and the top part as a tubular. Now, if we were to go by just the organic engineering thinking, we would have never approached this. So this happened with our play of products on the digital platform to be saying, how can we meet the cost, reliability, innovation requirement and bring that at a scale? So when you look at emerging markets like Vietnam, India, China, they want scale. They don't place a product in a small quantum. They want it in mega quantities and at a cost that's affordable. So one aspect was in our new product development. The second biggest aspect that we bought out was in our entire service portfolio. So we service a turbine, like I said, for 23 years or 25 years beyond. When you're maintaining so many different types of turbines, it's almost, you're looking at every part component in different geographies. And like Rama touched on, in certain countries, you have to meet the local content requirements. You know, when you think of markets like Brazil, you will have to make some of those components there. So how can you bring in digital technology here? So we put in an entire inventory management and a procurement on a smart procurement approach to be saying, I'm still going to buy from X vendor because it's a local content requirement, but I'm going to still get you other critical components from India, China, and other places. So this was the second aspect. Then we're making the turbines now, and it may sound very boring to the audience, and I'm sorry about that, and very tech savviness. But for each of the turbines, you know, when it's facing wind, how do you want to have it focus if the wind suddenly starts flowing in that direction? So we're putting microsensors across the turbines, which is removing the need to have the employee climbing and fixing those aspects into technology and platform to be saying, hey, now the wind is not this direction for the next 10 years, it's going to come in this direction. So we're adapting to more of simulation studies, sensor analysis, virtual reality studies, and data analytics to push in more and more on our service portfolio. And the last one would be on our corporate services. You know, like we had a discussion earlier with Namita saying, you know, corporate services play a very vital role as you become more of corporate and next generation growth. So right from our HR systems, you know, to, it may sound a simplest thing of having appraisals and PMS. You'd want to see everything's on digital aspect. But we've now made a lot of our trainings mandatory online. So right from each of our technicians to each of the leaders, HODs, have to go through various of these mandatory online studies before they even come to building the goal sheet. It's about learning the organization goals, then you prepare your goals. How do you appraise somebody? How do you get appraised? Trying to make it more 360-degree appraisal, juniors and subordinates appraising their bosses. Bosses likewise appraising back. So HR is just one aspect. We've done this across our functions and across all our different geographies to make it more transparent, moving away from people centricity, more process and output centricity. We've been hampering the aspect of output a lot when trying to go digital.
Namita, would love to hear, I mean, you know, what was it that you were looking to achieve through digitization of Emcure Pharma? And I mean, given that, you know, all of you are into extremely, I would say, heavy industries in one sense, and I mean, not just machinery-wise, but otherwise, did digitization bring the impact that you were looking for? And I mean, even if it's lacking, why do you think it's lacking?
Absolutely. So a couple of quick points here. Think about the pharma industry. We have 6,000 medical representatives going to 2 lakh doctors, right, and visiting and detailing to them. Salesforce automation. So when I joined, Salesforce automation wasn't big at Emcure. And imagine the amount of data we weren't capturing, which gives you a sense of how to intelligently execute your strategies. So we have that now, and that's had a huge impact because when you do a 4x4 chart and you see the areas which are not delivering, and the reasons. It's low-hanging fruit. You can, have some tailor-made approaches there and get sales right away. So the impact is definitely there. Second, we're, in the healthcare industry, patient education is very important. So we have the biggest anemia product, and 1 out of every 2 Indian women is anemic. So how do we educate women across the country, even in tier 2, tier 3 cities, on anemia? Patient education is one thing where digitization is important. Manufacturing, when you make injectables, it has to be an absolutely sterile environment. The more people you have, the more issues you'll have. We've learned it the hard way, but we're learning fast that when you digitize, you have fewer people, you can, in a sense, I'm not saying everywhere, in certain areas that are very critical, you can reduce the chances of contamination. And fourth and most important is I spoke about globalization. When you're that global, how do you put checks and balances in place? You have to have a centralized SAP system where a person sitting in Pune can audit across and have a checklist to make sure the right checks and balances in terms of processes are in place so there are no funny surprises. Again, some of these things we've learned the hard way. But, being a finance person, I'm a strong believer that only what gets measured gets delivered. And how can you measure something if you don't have digitization?
But has digitization actually manifested into business for you?
Absolutely. So the sales example, the India business identifying the low sales and the low hanging fruit has absolutely augmented the top line.
And because of digitization, were you able to address that issue?
Yes, absolutely. Identifying these pockets of potential or opportunity becomes a lot easier when you have those dashboards with the red, orange, or red, yellow, green. And then you know which are the areas you need to focus on rather than just have a one-size-fits-all approach pan-India. So I think digitization gives you a lot of information to make sure that the execution is a lot more tailor-made, and that's where the sales comes in.
So I'm asking you the question from a different direction. So this is your side that, you would like, so these are the pockets where your doctors are less responsive and those are the pockets where they're more responsive. But the point is, because of digitization and because of being able to figure it out, were you able to get a better response from your customer through the same digital platform? Because, obviously because you're going digital doesn't also mean that they are going digital. Right. So how do you sort of build that gap? One thing is to be able to find answers, but in such I would say, turbulent times where there's half digitization, half humanization, half...
I'll give you a quick answer to that. So for example, our customers are the doctors, right? We have to make sure we're educating them. So instead of having these conferences every time, we have webinars with international speakers. Now that's digitization where 1 hour, someone in UK who's an expert in nephrology will log in for an hour and 3,000 doctors across India log in and listen to them and have a live interaction with them. Where was this possible a few years, back to that extent? And the doctors abroad are also very happy to share some cutting edge research. So I think even the end customer, a lot of them, you're right, are still not open to technology. And we do face issues there where you have, again, the old-fashioned human touch, which is also important. But there are a lot of ways you can tap into doctor education, patient education through digitization.
Sure. Have you faced any problems in terms of, when you were digitizing and there was this, you were right, there was this one generation of people who've been, let's say, the inner circle of your father, and they would sort of have a certain chemistry which they would not have with you. And then there was a new team that you were coming and building up, and they would have a chemistry which they would not have with your father. Now, so these are two clubs which suddenly get formed in the same organization. And how do you sort of get these clubs on the same level? Because the end goal is the same, the purpose is the same that everybody is trying to address. So how do you sort of bridge that gap? And obviously because you're promoters, and then there's a CEO who's reporting to you, and he's going to, or she's going to buy your vision and take this further out into the markets. How do you achieve that?
So Ritu, I'll start exactly with where I placed myself on the organization chart. So I'm placing myself right below the chairman and close to the entire CXO layer. So that's where I smartly created this entire department and vertical that I belong to. When I came back in post my master's, the biggest question was, which function do you want to get into? And my idea was none of them. So I said, you know, if I go into finance, of course, I'm going to look at the numbers, see the tax savviness, I'm going to see taxation and audit. When I go into sales, I'm going to see customer focus. When I go into supply chain, I'm going to think about procurement strategies. But I need to be placed at a place where I can see everything. It's only then that I would be able to figure out what is in my legacy aspects, be it the first generation, you know, changes that needs to happen and adapt, and also keeping an eye onto what needs to be done for future. So having placed in that department, that's what I do right now. So I'm working with the entire CXO layer. So we've moved in 23 years from being a first generation promoter to a corporate to now a multinational. We are adapting to change very quickly. And you know, I think we were having this discussion earlier saying, do you see a lot of legacy aspects? Of course there are. There's seeding in factors, there's seeding in issues on every step of the way. You know, when you talk digital, when you talk about new ways of doing business. But I think a lot comes in on credibility building. A lot comes in trying to get those wins, proving out into the organization that things are possible. A simple example of when we were adapting to a new product development process. The idea was to cut short the product time by half. So every year now, we're bringing out a new product. And this is not just a product of your bottle creation or a cell phone. This is a mega turbine of 140 meters in height, right? And innovating. So we had, of course, a legacy factors when the first generation was very fixated on, no, we just need to keep it to 80 meters. We need to only give this much of rotor dia. Because at the end of the day, the customers are not asking for more. But now we have power utilities in the world. We're not catering to retail business in India. We're catering to international scale utilities. They have huge expectations. They have expectations of visibility right from your sales of the turbine. They want to know what components you've used. If you dare change any components, you need to go back in for the approval. So having to do that and bring out a product every year, huge effort. So we put in an entire system, digital system that creates and enables a new product development. And at every step of the way, we had to go back to the Gen 1, Gen 2, the next gen, all coming and sitting into various forums, committees, discussions. It's one of the most exciting chapter of fights that we have on creating new product. But that's how it's happening. Every year now we're introducing a new product and a new innovation. And there's a constant learning that needs to go in. People have to log into the defined hours of e-learning tools when they have to go and educate on various components, where they're done, how the entire approach works. To sit down and then discuss on saying what's our strategy to go to the retail customers. We're not losing them. We have 100% base of retail customers still who we're catering to in first gen. And now we've grown to multi-utilities around the world. So customers get to see every step of the way through our online platforms.
So it's brought more transparency.
Huge, huge transparency.
That's very interesting. Rama, how's it been for you? I mean, you know, to me, digitization is a function of business. And if it doesn't bring business, then, I mean, you know, we can just be happy with getting digital, but it doesn't sort of add any value.
Right. So being digital for us is not only getting onto an IT platform, it also has to do with automation. And the minute we work with different kinds of robotic arms in our factories, we're able to get a better quality and better consistency in quality. That said, I understand where you're coming from, and you're talking about maybe, you know, how do we work with our vendors, our suppliers? One issue is that as a global company, the company itself is exposed to a lot of global business, but that may not be the case for our suppliers or our vendors, which is why they possibly don't find the need to change in terms of going digital. But I think eventually, just like the auto sector evolved over time, that would happen in our industry as well, because in order to get that kind of quality, you need to have very good monitoring systems at all levels in your organization. You need to be able to point out where those defects are and remove those outliers. So I think quality is going to be playing a very important role in the future, especially for products that go internationally. And our vendors will have to change with those changing times.
Correct. So I know we're running out of time, but very quickly, the last thing that I would like to know is that, I mean, what specific innovations were it, maybe small innovations, that brought some sort of togetherness into the company. I mean, because, obviously when you diversify, you have offices outside the country, you have Indian people, and as I said, taking everybody along becomes a bit of a challenge, which one needs to address as an organization. So one thing is, of course, the service function. But, doing little things for people, I mean, some sort of innovation days or some kind of, I would say, some activities which
Right.
helps them to be a little more creative.
Right.
Because, more often than not, I feel the problems of the business also have solutions,
Right.
which are within. Uh, Much often you don't have to go and look at them outside, but the
Right.
idea is, because everybody is so busy with their everyday rut work that
Yes.
nobody gives a glance to it. And only, as I said, comes back down to the entrepreneur, to the promoter to
Right.
do something about it. So what is it that you do to ensure it happens?
So we've made a point to instill this blue skies kind of culture in our organization, and we do have these blue skies meetings quite regularly, because if we've seen the past few years and the kinds of technologies and the disruptions that they have brought, I don't believe that our biggest competitor is going to be from the pump industry. It could be from anywhere today. So I think it's important that companies like us look at other areas as well and not just stick to pumps and heavy engineering. Gone are the days where you get a job in an area that you specialized in college. It's become very, very interdisciplinary. I see more generalists now. You see mathematicians becoming lawyers. You see engineers going into consultancy. So, there's a lot of this lateral movement. And because of that lateral movement, you have a lot of application of knowledge from one field going into another. And I think, therefore, my biology and mathematics background there has actually been an advantage for me, because I think I bring a different perspective to an engineering company. And in the same manner, I think we need to look at other avenues and other areas of innovation, look towards those areas for innovation. For example, biomimicry is a whole new field that has come up, where they're looking at, designing, engineering and taking inspiration from nature. A lot of trains built in China have looked at avian anatomy to enhance their speed. So there are a lot of things that we can learn from other fields as well, and I think we need to keep our eyes open everywhere now.
Sure. Maybe.
I think, Ritu, we have few chapters on innovation, so I'll stick to some of that. One that we have is annually we run an entire program called Suzlon Excellence in Innovation. In that, we encourage every employee, every technician, every manufacturer in the company to build out some new ideas, and not just ideas on paper. We give them enough resources to even make a prototype. So we have an annual event which runs for 3 days, where everybody gets to showcase the product, the ideas and innovation that they have come out with. So this is one direct product level, if I were to see, and service level innovation. And it's a huge motivation builder, So when you have somebody who's climbing that turbine 3 times a day and knows that that step ladder needs to change and does not get to tell anybody that please help me change that step ladder, to actually building a prototype and coming out, the way we check our oiling systems. So we start with a lot of in-house innovation, like you said, when there is a problem, 80–90% of the time, the person reporting the problem also has a solution. They just need the means and the weaponry and tools to be able to tackle that problem. So that's one clear onto the product level innovation. Then we run a lot of entrepreneurial series of encouragement, right from schools to the newer age generation who come and visit our campus, which is, LEED and GREA certified with 100% renewable energy. We get them to encourage and put into the ideas. So we have an entire program called Ideas for More. That entire program works on new innovation aspects of something from as small as rooftop solar. How can we make it efficient? Building smaller turbines which can be efficient for the house energy usage. Directly may not be the fields that we're catering to right now, but through this innovation, we're creating a repository of ideas that we want to bring in for future product development in different sectors. So we're creating 2 portfolio of innovation: product innovation, service innovations, employee-owned driving of innovation. So there's 3 of these micro chapters, I would say.
Which I think is very good from a larger perspective. From an organization building perspective, it's priceless.
Absolutely.
Namita?
Yeah, so I'll just give one quick example. We have a strategy department that identifies gaps in certain areas or niche projects. And I think sometimes the best innovation happens when you have cross-functional teams coming together and working on those projects with a good facilitator. So we've actually done a good job of every year saying that these are our top 5 pain points. And then we managed to get cross-functional teams to work on those issues. And some of the best ideas have come when they've been full-time dedicated to that project, sitting in a room, working together. Otherwise, everyone's just busy working in silos.
Right, yeah. So I think that those were some great perspectives on how do you actually build up a family business and take it to the next level, because that's where it needs to go, and it can only go when, as young entrepreneurs, we see things differently. But the purpose, as I said, continues. The end game is the same, but the approach has to be much different than probably what it was earlier. And of course, I do see probably going in the future, a lot of you actually working very collaboratively with young organizations, young entrepreneurs who might bring a lot of value into the organization. Either it's an extension to your business or maybe a different dimension to your business that would come forward. Thank you very much. I think it was such an interesting chat, and I just love the kind of work that you're doing. It's so complex. It's like almost like 10 years back I would have said it's like a man's world you're sitting into. But today I think there is no such world. We are all living in a common world. And but I wish you all the very best in your ventures, and I think under your leadership, the organizations are only going to grow multi-million, billion times more. So all the very best to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was keeping it.
We have one question. So we request you to please connect offline, as we are running a bit behind schedule, so you can connect with the speakers offline. It's a request.
Request accepted.
Thank you so much. With this, we come to an end of this panel discussion. Thank you so much, panelists, for a power-packed session, and I'm sure all of us have gained immensely. As per our tradition, I request Ms. Maria to please present mementos to the co-panelists.